Hello everyone, it is Reese here, and today I'm talking about imposter syndrome. What is imposter syndrome, and how can you sort of respond to help practice self-compassion and reflect upon your worth as a scholar and academic? So to begin, what is imposter syndrome? Well, it's a term that sort of kicked off around the 1970s, but the main idea really is that it's feelings of inadequacy, i.e. a sense that sort of perhaps you don't deserve your successes, that you're sort of a fraud in whatever you're doing or not good enough. Often this can be a result of a comparison to others who are sort of seen as better, however that's defined. But it manifests in a variety of ways, setting unrealistic expectations of yourself and thinking you should have done far more than you are doing, self-sabotaging before new opportunities appear, or attributing sort of successes you have to others and sort of exaggerating the role of others and downplaying yourself, your own role. So it's kind of this sense of sort of essentially sort of an internal monologue that's kind of telling you that you're not quite good enough, even though sort of empirically you are. So I think a key thing to think about in terms of imposter syndrome is to acknowledge that you're not actually alone. So it's quite a hard thing to sort of tabulate, to sort of get quantitative data on. But some studies suggest it could be anywhere from the region of 20% of people in academia up to above 90% who suffer at some point from imposter syndrome. And this is at the student level, this is at the staff level, this is even senior staff level. Um, and it's sort of to acknowledge that sort of this is a thing that everyone has, this sort of sense of sort of not being good enough. And part of this emerges. It's quite easy to view sort of the academic world as a fight, especially at sort of the student level. You know, you're competing with others to get good grades. At a staff level, say you're an academic, you're competing to get sort of some of the vanishingly few sort of academic posts. So it's quite easy to sort of inherently, based on the structures, compare yourself with others. But what I would say is that to note that essentially sort of everyone is likely thinking the same way, or at least having similar sorts of thoughts. So a key way of sort of trying to address feelings of imposter syndrome is to practice self-compassion, is um, to sort of try and understand that this is a usual feeling. There's nothing sort of inherently unusual about sort of doubting your ability, doubting your sort of capacity to do something. And to acknowledge that's a feeling that exists. And it's not something to ignore if it's there. The question is sort of what you do with it rather than trying to sort of necessarily defeat it. Um, and what you could do is think about sort of feedback mechanisms. So if you're worried that you're sort of not inherently good enough to do something, seek feedback from people who know, seek feedback from mentors, from friends, from colleagues, and get them to sort of be critical and fair. Sort of say the things that you do well as the things where you may need some support. That is a wonderful thing where sort of having someone else's perspective can help you sort of place your own feelings in a more sort of reasoned order. Then I would say, is there support available? So in a sort of a university context, it may be the case there's wellbeing support, and there may be training that can help with those feelings. There may be sort of specific sessions being run. Is there support you can access that can help you process these things, to help you address them in ways? And maybe having someone to talk to, and maybe going through a training session. I don't know the exact thing, and I'm sure sort of the institution would be able to sort of advise you. But if you think that support's there, again, sort of try and take care of yourself by seeking it, by accessing it, and by using it. Lastly, what we have here is what I've called perspective shifts. So this is acknowledging that sort of challenges happen, that there are bumps along the road, but trying not to frame them as a kind of sort of mega critique on your self-worth, but trying to reflect on them honestly as sort of what they are. So things like making mistakes. Mistakes are part of the process. It will be the case for everyone that there's an essay that didn't go well, there's an assignment that bombed, and there's a presentation that didn't work. And sort of trying to view it as a learning experience, trying to view it as something to sort of develop on, rather than sort of inherent proof that you're not good, is a really valuable thing, and it's a tough thing to internalise. But this is kind of what I mean, is sort of trying to shift these things that will happen, um, in terms of trying to make them sort of useful to you. Um, I would say as well is that in many of these contexts, it's often the case that you're doing quite novel work, You're doing things that are new to you. You're sort of pushing the boundaries of fields. You're pushing the boundaries of ideas. And it's normal not to have all of the answers. It's very normal to look at things and say, I do not know this. Again, that is part of the process. And sort of trying to reflect on, again, the sort of that not having all the answers is not a bad thing. That's never a bad thing. That gives you a chance to learn more, to investigate, to potentially find things that you weren't necessarily looking for. And lastly, I think it's really useful to sort of try and document and reflect on the wins. Look at things that went well and sort of try and reflect on those successes. You know, a mark may have gone well, or an assignment or a presentation. Again, these are sort of obvious things. But, you know, you set yourself a writing goal, say, and hit that, you know. Reflect on that as sort of proof that you're doing it, you can sort of organise. So sort of trying to pick up on the wins big and small. And again, it may be the case that sort of you're reflecting on these in conversation with mentors or friends or colleagues who can sort of advise you on those successes without from a sort of an external viewpoint, an external vantage point. So sort of trying to shift, these are all things that will happen. I'm not saying, you know, there will be things that go wrong. There'll be times where you don't know the answers to things. There'll be things... So it's trying to sort of reframe those in ways that are sort of not essentially tearing you up inside and sort of causing you to cast doubt on your worth, but sort of seeing them as opportunities for growth and development. So this was a video on imposter syndrome, and I know that many of the tips and pieces of advice I've given in this video are in a sense kind of easier said than done. It's kind of incumbent on you to sort of try and address that in whatever way is perhaps best resonant for you. What I would say is this is a shared experience, particularly in the academic world. So please, you know, if you're watching this with that feeling, at least know that you are not on your own. And this is something that sort of everyone goes through and everyone manages. Hopefully this has been useful. If there are any more tips, any experiences, any feedback, then please do share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear sort of how people have addressed this, because this is something that I know is an ongoing issue. It's something that really continually proves challenging at all levels of the academic world. And thank you very much for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and make sure to subscribe. Ring the bell so you know when there's a new video coming. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.